1. Judge Thomas J. Maloney, Illinois, Operation Greylord's Dark Star. In the 1980s, Chicago's courts hid a secret so shocking it shook the entire state. Judges, lawyers, and police officers were taking bribes, and at the heart of it all was Judge Thomas J. Maloney. He wore the black robe with authority, but behind closed doors, he treated justice like a business. Maloney didn't just accept money for small favors, he fixed murder trials for cash. Maloney had started as a defense attorney before becoming a judge in Cook County. In court, he appeared tough and commanding, a no-nonsense figure who seemed to uphold the law. But that was a mask. In reality, Maloney was for sale. Guilty or innocent didn't matter, what mattered was the size of the bribe. Lawyers acted as middlemen, approaching desperate families of defendants in serious cases, drug crimes, gang violence, even murders. They suggested that a payment could sway the judge. Sometimes it meant a lighter sentence. Other times, it meant complete acquittal, even when the evidence was strong. Families often had no choice, pay or risk losing a loved one for life. And for Maloney, every deal padded his corrupt fortune. One shocking example came in 1981. Two men accused of a double murder during a gang dispute faced strong evidence, eyewitnesses, ballistics, and motive. Yet money changed hands, and Maloney's decision was already bought. In court, he acted serious and fair, but he acquitted the defendants, stunning prosecutors and victims' families. Later, it was revealed he had pocketed tens of thousands of dollars for that verdict. Operation Greylord began when insiders suspected just how deep the corruption ran. The FBI and IRS planted undercover agents, including one disguised as a crooked lawyer. Phones were tapped, cash trails tracked, and secret meetings recorded. Over 4 years, they gathered enough evidence to charge dozens of officials. By the end, more than 90 judges, lawyers, clerks, and police were convicted, but none was as notorious as Maloney. His downfall came when middlemen testified, describing how bribes were arranged and cash delivered in envelopes, often before juries even heard the evidence. Maloney had accepted bribes in multiple trials, including 3 separate murders. Lives were sold to the highest bidder. In 1993, Maloney was convicted of racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, and obstructing justice. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Once a man who controlled life and death, he became just a prisoner identified by a number. He died in 2008 at 82, remembered not for his rulings, but for his corruption. Operation Greylord forced sweeping reforms in Illinois. Courts were monitored more closely, and safeguards were added to prevent bribery. Yet Maloney's legacy remains a warning, even the highest judges can betray justice if greed takes over. 2. Chief Traffic Judge Richard F. Lefevre, Illinois, Ticket Kingpin. In 1980 Chicago, traffic court might sound boring, speeding tickets, parking violations, or DUIs. But for Chief Traffic Judge Richard F. Lefevre, it was a goldmine. At the top of Cook County's traffic division, he didn't just enforce the law. He ran traffic court like a personal business, selling justice to the highest bidder. Lefevre's scheme was simple but massive. Lawyers who wanted favorable rulings for their clients, ticket dismissals, delayed hearings, or dropped DUI charges, had to pay. Sometimes the money went straight to Lefevre, other times it was shared with clerks and insiders. Either way, he controlled the system. If you had cash, the law bent in your favor. If you didn't, you faced the full weight of the court. It wasn't just about small fines. Drivers caught drunk driving, risking lives, were let off easy if they could pay. Parking tickets, speeding fines, suspended licenses, all could vanish with the right envelope. For lawyers, paying the judge became part of business. For those who couldn't, the court was a trap. Operation Greylord, the FBI's massive undercover probe, exposed Lefevre's empire. Agents and informants recorded the flow of cash. They found that he had been fixing cases for years while keeping up a respected public image. Lefevre was a career judge, well known in legal circles, but behind the robe, he ran one of the most systematic corruption schemes uncovered in Chicago. When the trial began, the evidence was overwhelming. Lawyers, clerks, and even other judges testified, painting Lefevre as a man who had abandoned fairness entirely. He faced charges of racketeering, mail fraud, and tax evasion. Prosecutors showed he had personally pocketed thousands of dollars from lawyers in exchange for favorable rulings. In some cases, he even decided which lawyers got the most profitable clients, rewarding loyalty with power. Lefevre tried to defend himself, claiming he was framed and witnesses were lying. But the evidence was too strong. Witness after witness described bribes delivered, cases fixed quietly, and everyone in the traffic court system knowing the rules. He hadn't misunderstood the law, he had turned it into a cash register. In 1988, Lefevre was convicted on 19 counts of racketeering, mail fraud, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The chief judge of traffic court, once respected and feared, became a federal inmate. His conviction sent shockwaves through Chicago's legal community and revealed the depth of corruption in Cook County. Lefevre became known as the ticket kingpin, the judge who treated traffic court as his private business. To the FBI, he was proof that corruption reached the very top. To the public, he was a symbol of a system that had gone completely wrong, showing how even the smallest courts could be twisted by greed.
3. Judge Abel C. Lemus, Texas, border bench for sale. In Brownsville, Texas, Judge Abel C. Lemus sat on the bench of the 404th District Court, a figure of authority whose rulings shaped lives across Cameron County. He had the robe, the gavel, and the respect of the community. But behind closed doors, Lemus wasn't serving justice, he was selling it. His courtroom had become a marketplace, where freedom and favorable rulings could be bought. Lemus's scheme started quietly but grew into one of the largest corruption scandals in Texas. Lawyers who wanted lighter sentences, delayed trials, or smoother hearings knew the process: pay the judge. The more money offered, the better the outcome. It wasn't about law or evidence anymore, it was about cash. And Lemus was at the center, controlling it all. He funneled money through a web of attorneys and middlemen. Sometimes bribes came in envelopes, other times through fake loans or consulting deals. On paper, it looked legitimate, but the FBI discovered the truth: these payments were bribes for judicial favors. Lemus would lower bonds, delay hearings, or rule in ways that benefited those who paid. The corruption wasn't limited to the courtroom, it spread through local politics, law enforcement, and the district attorney's office. People whispered that justice no longer belonged to the law, it belonged to whoever could afford it. The FBI launched a full investigation, using wiretaps, insiders, and financial tracking. They uncovered hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands over years. Lemus, who had sworn to uphold the law, had turned his bench into an auction block. By 2011, the scandal exploded into public view. Lemus was arrested and charged with racketeering, extortion, and federal conspiracy. Investigators revealed he had accepted at least $257,000 in bribes, and that other lawyers and local officials had been drawn into the corruption. The FBI described the county system as a culture of corruption, with Lemus at its center. In court, Lemus didn't fight. He pleaded guilty, admitting he had abused his power for profit. He acknowledged his wrongdoing, but the damage was done. Families who had trusted the courts realized their cases may have been tainted, and defendants wondered if freedom, or punishment, had simply been bought. In 2013, Lemus was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. For a man who had once commanded respect, the fall was crushing. His robe was stripped away, his law license revoked, and his reputation destroyed. He went from pure honor to just another inmate in a federal facility. The scandal didn't end with him. The investigation exposed how far corruption had spread in the border courts, leading to multiple indictments and convictions of lawyers and public officials. For the people of Brownsville, the betrayal was personal. In a community already struggling with poverty and crime, the courts were supposed to be a source of fairness. Instead, they had been turned into a business, a place where justice could be bought, leaving trust shattered for years to come. 4. Justice Rodolfo Rudy Delgado, Texas, bond for bribes. In South Texas, Justice Rodolfo Rudy Delgado sat on the 13th Court of Appeals, a rising star in the legal system whose rulings affected thousands across the Rio Grande Valley. To the public, he was a respected man of the law, someone who had earned the title of justice through years of hard work. But behind the robe and the courtroom dignity, Delgado ran a secret side business, selling freedom to defendants who could pay. The bribe was the price, and bond was the product. Delgado's scheme was direct and disturbing. Defense attorneys with clients in trouble knew the procedure: cash first, bond later. The bigger the charges, the bigger the payoff. Instead of weighing evidence, public safety, or risk, Delgado weighed dollar bills. Money dictated who stayed locked up and who walked free. The FBI and Department of Justice uncovered the operation after tips suggested certain defendants were being released unusually quickly. Agents followed the trail, envelopes of cash passed discreetly from lawyers, and Delgado granting bond decisions that defied logic and law. Sometimes he lowered bond amounts, other times he released defendants outright. In every case, the payments came first. What made Delgado's betrayal even more shocking was his position. He wasn't a small-town judge, he was an appellate justice, one step below the Texas Supreme Court. His rulings didn't just affect individual cases, they set precedent across the state. To find someone in such a position abusing power for cash was a scandal that rocked the Texas legal system. In 2019, Delgado was indicted on federal charges including bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The trial revealed years of secret deals, hidden transactions, and quiet exchanges in parking lots and offices. Witnesses described how money always preceded favorable rulings, creating a system of corruption that tainted the law itself. Delgado tried to defend himself, claiming he was unfairly targeted, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, recordings, and first-hand testimony showed repeated abuse of power. The jury had no doubt he was guilty of bribery and obstruction of justice. In 2021, Delgado was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. A man who once commanded respect on one of Texas's highest courts was reduced to a prisoner number. His title of justice was stripped away forever, his reputation destroyed. He was also disbarred, banned from practicing law again, and remembered only as a symbol of judicial betrayal. The impact of his corruption was profound. Victims' families wondered if dangerous defendants had been set free. Defendants without money questioned whether they had been treated fairly. Every decision Delgado made became suspect, shaking public trust in the legal system. In the Rio Grande Valley, the gavel no longer meant justice, it meant opportunity for anyone who could pay. 5. Judge O. Joseph Boatman Jr., Arkansas, sex for sentences. In small-town Arkansas, Judge O. Joseph Boatman Jr. held a position few questioned. As a district court judge, he handled misdemeanor cases, traffic violations, and low-level offenses. People came into his courtroom nervous, hoping for mercy. What they didn't know was that Boatman was running one of the most disturbing schemes in U.S. judicial history. He wasn't just judging cases, he was exploiting vulnerable men for his own twisted purposes. Boatman's scheme hid behind the idea of community service. He told defendants that instead of paying fines or serving jail time, they could work off their sentences. To someone struggling financially, it seemed like a lifeline. But his community service wasn't picking up trash or volunteering, it was sexual exploitation. Defendants were ordered to report directly to the judge, where they were forced into humiliating acts and photographed for his private collection. Investigators later found thousands of photographs showing men in degrading positions, often taken in private backyards under the guise of court-ordered work. Dozens of men came forward, describing almost identical experiences. Many were teenagers or young men who felt trapped, unable to pay fines and fearing jail. When the judge himself instructed them, they believed they had no choice. Justice, in Boatman's courtroom, had been weaponized against those who depended on it most. By 2016, federal investigators uncovered the full extent of the abuse. Boatman faced charges of wire fraud, bribery, witness tampering, and possession of child pornography. Evidence included the explicit photos, testimony from exploited men, and records showing cases were dismissed after these community service sessions. The robe that symbolized fairness had become a shield for predation. In 2017, Boatman pleaded guilty to 2 federal felonies, wire fraud and witness tampering. He admitted using his position to obtain sexual favors from defendants. Worse, when investigators closed in, he tried to bribe a witness to stay silent, showing his desperation to hide the crimes. In 2019, Boatman was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His law license was permanently revoked, ensuring he could never return to the bench. The Department of Justice called his actions a shocking betrayal, noting he had turned his courtroom into a hunting ground for victims. The scandal forced Arkansas to confront its oversight failures. How could a judge exploit his position for so long without detection? The case led to calls for greater transparency, stronger accountability, and protections for defendants who might otherwise be easy targets for abuse. Boatman's fall was a stark reminder that even those sworn to deliver justice can become the most dangerous predators of all. 6. Judge Jack T. Camp Jr., Georgia, Guns, Drugs, and the Gavel. In Atlanta, Georgia, Judge Jack T. Camp Jr. held one of the most powerful positions in the federal court system. Appointed by President Reagan, he spent more than 2 decades deciding the fates of defendants facing serious crimes like drug trafficking and gun offenses. People trembled in his courtroom, knowing his rulings could change their lives forever. But in 2010, the same gavel he had wielded to punish others turned against him. Behind the stern reputation, Camp was living a secret life filled with drugs, guns, and reckless decisions. The scandal began after he became involved with an exotic dancer in Atlanta. What started as a personal relationship quickly turned criminal. Camp purchased cocaine, marijuana, and prescription painkillers, often carrying his government-issued Glock handgun during these drug-fueled trips. He was not just breaking the law, he was breaking it with the very weapon taxpayers had entrusted to him for protection. The FBI launched an undercover investigation, with the dancer cooperating. Meetings were recorded where Camp handed over cash for drugs and openly bragged about his position as a federal judge. On one occasion, he even boasted that wearing the judicial robe would protect him, claiming no one would suspect a judge of trafficking drugs. The arrogance was staggering. Here was a man who had sentenced countless people for the exact crimes he was committing, acting as though he was untouchable. In October 2010, the investigation reached its peak. Camp was arrested in a parking lot after purchasing drugs from an undercover agent. The news shocked the public, a sitting federal judge caught in a drug and gun scandal. The man who had judged others for narcotics offenses was now facing the same charges himself. Camp pleaded guilty in 2011 to unlawful possession of controlled substances, possession of a firearm while using drugs, and misuse of government property for using his government-issued laptop to arrange illegal activities. His guilty plea was an acknowledgement that his double life had finally caught up with him. The sentence was 30 days in prison, 1 year of supervised release, and 400 hours of community service. While the time behind bars seemed short, the damage was far greater. Years of rulings came under scrutiny, as defense attorneys argued that clients might not have received fair trials from a judge who had been abusing drugs. The integrity of the federal court in Atlanta was shaken. When Camp completed his sentence, his career was over. He resigned from the bench, lost his law license, and became a cautionary tale of how arrogance and addiction can destroy even the most powerful. His legacy was not justice served, but hypocrisy exposed, showing that even those sworn to uphold the law can fall prey to the very crimes they punish. 7. Judge Donald D. Thompson, Oklahoma, Courtroom Indecency. In Creek County, Oklahoma, Judge Donald D. Thompson had spent more than 20 years presiding over serious cases, from murder trials to criminal hearings. To the public, he was a man of authority, wearing the robe of justice with dignity. But behind the bench, Thompson was hiding a shocking secret, one that turned the courtroom, a place meant for solemn law, into a scene of indecency. The scandal began when court staff and police officers noticed strange noises during trials. At first, it was dismissed as squeaky chairs or odd sounds from under the bench. But soon, the truth emerged. Thompson was using a penis pump while court was in session, sometimes even during high-profile trials. Witnesses testified that they saw him expose himself and heard the distinctive hissing of the device. At critical moments, instead of focusing on the law, he was engaged in acts that were both distracting and obscene. The behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was criminal. Prosecutors charged Thompson with indecent exposure and outraging public decency. Investigators seized the device along with other evidence that confirmed what witnesses had described. The courtroom, where families expected fairness and respect, had become a scene of humiliation and betrayal. During his trial, Thompson denied the accusations, claiming witnesses exaggerated and the device wasn't misused. But the evidence was overwhelming. Court reporters, staff, and even law enforcement described seeing and hearing repeated misconduct. Photographs and records left little doubt. This was not a one-time lapse, but a disturbing pattern that violated every standard of judicial behavior. The public reaction was one of disbelief and outrage. People struggled to understand how a judge could behave this way in front of jurors and families seeking justice. For those attending his courtroom, what should have been solemn proceedings were overshadowed by Thompson's shocking actions. In 2006, Thompson was convicted on 4 felony counts of indecent exposure. The sentence was 4 years in state prison, far harsher than many had expected for a local judge. He also lost his law license and was permanently barred from holding any judicial office. The fall from grace was complete. A man once respected for his authority had become a national example of courtroom corruption of a very unusual and disturbing kind. Thompson served his sentence and was released in 2010, but his reputation was destroyed forever. His story became infamous nationwide, a shocking tale of a judge who violated the public trust in one of the most bizarre ways imaginable. For the people of Oklahoma, it was a painful reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law could disgrace the very system they represented. 8. Judge Jessica Aram O'Brien, Illinois, mortgage fraud on the bench. Jessica Aram O'Brien once seemed unstoppable. She made history as the first Filipino-American elected judge in Cook County, Illinois. People admired her journey, rising from humble beginnings to the courtroom, proving that hard work could break barriers. She wore her robe with pride, spoke with authority, and represented justice. But behind that inspiring image was a secret. O'Brien had been running mortgage fraud schemes long before she ever became a judge, and that past would catch up with her in the worst way. Before joining the bench, O'Brien worked in real estate. She and a partner began manipulating property deals, using fake information to secure mortgages that banks should never have approved. They inflated property values, hid debts, and lied about income to trick lenders into handing over large sums. The schemes brought them quick cash, while banks and buyers took the risk. For years, it worked, until investigators started noticing irregular records and her name kept appearing. By the time authorities moved in, O'Brien was a sitting Cook County Circuit Court judge. The accusations were explosive. How could someone entrusted with fairness and the law have spent years cheating banks for profit? In 2017, federal prosecutors indicted her for mail fraud and bank fraud. The trial revealed the details: falsified documents, inflated property values, and loan applications built on lies. O'Brien had exploited her knowledge of real estate to cheat the system, long before she swore an oath as a judge. Her defense tried to claim mistakes or sloppy paperwork, but the jury wasn't convinced. In 2018, she was convicted on both counts. For the Cook County courts, it was a bitter humiliation. A judge who had sworn to uphold the law found guilty of breaking it for personal gain. Sentencing came in 2019. O'Brien received 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, plus 2 years of supervised release. The extra day allowed her to earn good behavior credit while incarcerated. Prosecutors highlighted not only the financial damage she caused to banks but also the betrayal of public trust. Wearing a robe didn't protect her, it made her crimes even worse in the eyes of the law. After her conviction, O'Brien resigned and lost her law license. She could never practice law again. Her case left a shadow over the Cook County courts. If a judge could lie to banks for profit, could the public trust her past rulings? Families, lawyers, and colleagues all felt the sting of betrayal. O'Brien served her sentence quietly and was released, but her legacy was ruined. Instead of being remembered as a pioneering figure, she became a cautionary tale of how ambition and deceit can destroy even the most promising careers. Her story remains a stark warning. A judge's authority means little if integrity is sold for profit. 9. Judge Mark T. Ciavarella Jr., Kids for Cash, when justice was sold. Mark T. Ciavarella Jr. wore the black robe of a judge in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. He was supposed to stand for fairness and guide young people who made mistakes. Instead, he turned his courtroom into one of the darkest scandals in American history, a scheme remembered forever as Kids for Cash. The plan was both simple and cruel. Together with another judge, Michael Conahan, Ciavarella secretly took nearly $2.8 million from private prison developers. These payments were hidden as finder's fees or rent. But the truth was clear: the more children he locked away, the more money he earned. Court was no longer about justice. It was about filling cells for profit. Kids as young as 11 and 12 came before him for small offenses, spray painting walls, shoplifting, or schoolyard fights. In most courts, those cases would mean warnings, probation, or counseling. But in Ciavarella's courtroom, there was no mercy. He proudly called himself a zero-tolerance judge. With a slam of his gavel, children expecting to go home were handcuffed and taken away, sometimes without even a lawyer to defend them. Parents sat stunned as their kids vanished into the system. Families were broken apart in minutes. Thousands of children, many first-time offenders, lost months, even years, of their lives inside prison-like detention centers. What Ciavarella saw as business, those kids experienced as trauma. The numbers were staggering. Between 2003 and 2008, more than 2,500 children were affected by his rulings. They missed school, birthdays, and milestones. Many came out scarred, carrying the pain of being treated like criminals when they had barely begun their lives. But rumors began to spread. Parents, lawyers, and advocates noticed something odd: minor crimes leading to extreme sentences, with the same private detention centers always receiving the kids. By 2009, investigators dug deep. The FBI uncovered the payments, and the story broke wide open. Ciavarella tried to defend himself. Yes, he admitted he had taken money. But he insisted it wasn't a bribe, just a payment for helping build a juvenile center. Prosecutors didn't buy it. The zero-tolerance policy wasn't about discipline, it was about greed. In 2011, a federal jury found him guilty of racketeering, fraud, and money laundering. Parents testified about the heartbreak of watching their children dragged away. Former inmates told how their lives had been wrecked by the judge's greed. The image of justice in Luzerne County was shattered. Ciavarella was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for a man in his 60s. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court then overturned thousands of his rulings, giving families a measure of justice, though nothing could return the stolen years. The scandal forced reforms in Pennsylvania's juvenile courts, with new safeguards to protect children. Advocacy groups still use Kids for Cash as a warning of how corruption can destroy lives. Today, Ciavarella sits in prison, stripped of his robe and power. He once sold children's futures for profit. Now, his own future is nothing more than time behind bars. 10. Judge Michael T. Joyce, Pennsylvania. Fraud from the appellate bench. Michael T. Joyce once sat on Pennsylvania's Superior Court, one of the highest benches in the state, making decisions that affected millions. To the public, he was a symbol of fairness and authority. But behind the row, Joyce was running a scheme fueled by greed. In 2001, Joyce was involved in 2 minor car accidents. Though barely injured, he claimed the accidents had left him permanently disabled and unable to perform his judicial duties. He told insurance companies he could no longer think clearly or work properly. In reality, Joyce was living a full, active life, playing golf, flying planes, scuba diving, riding motorcycles, and traveling to places like Jamaica. Using these lies, Joyce filed lawsuits and collected nearly $500,000 from insurers. He used the money for personal debts, real estate, and a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, all while continuing to serve as a full-time Superior Court judge, writing opinions and handling complex cases he claimed he could not manage. Investigators noticed the mismatch between his claims and his lifestyle. The FBI examined travel records, medical reports, and witness statements, revealing the full scale of the fraud. Joyce had created a web of lies to enrich himself at the expense of insurance companies and public trust. In 2008, he was convicted of mail fraud and money laundering. Evidence showed that his alleged mental and physical disabilities were fabricated. Golf scorecards, travel records, and testimonies confirmed that Joyce had been fully capable, exposing the irony of a judge who punished fraud in others but committed it himself. In 2009, Joyce was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, and ordered to repay the money he had stolen. Yet controversy followed. Pennsylvania law allowed him to keep his judicial pension because his crimes were federal, not state, highlighting a loophole that let a convicted fraudster continue collecting taxpayer-funded retirement. Joyce served his sentence and was released in 2013. He never returned to the bench, and his career and reputation were destroyed. For Pennsylvanians, the story of Judge Michael T. Joyce became a bitter reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law can betray it, using the very authority entrusted to them for personal gain. From the courtroom to the prison cell, these judges show how power and greed can twist the law. Each rogue that should protect justice instead hid corruption, but every crime left a trail. The system caught them, yet the damage was done. Their stories warn us, when those we trust most break the rules, everyone suffers. More scandals and shocking falls await. Tell me your country, and subscribe, because the story of justice gone wrong is far from over.